Yeah, thank you everybody for being there today. Yeah, so Thomas and I, we're going to be talking about this project we have been developing and delivering during the last 3 years. So yeah, I titled this presentation as that because it's I think more appealing than the title of the project itself. So this is about using available genetic resources to build economic resilience, and everything is based on Sitka spruce. We will discuss how this can be also be transferred to other species. So before I get into any detail, I want to introduce the team. Most of this project has been delivered by Forest Research, mainly two teams involved: the tree and wood properties team and the tree breeding team. So the core team for the project has been actually something across FR teams. So with Richard Whitted and myself co-leading the project, and then Thomas Bayer and Domen Fingar basically doing the hard work for us. We have been supported also by people abroad, mostly from INRA in France. That's a lab of forestry economics. And then we have had also contractors have helped in specific areas, also from INRA and from the Slovenian Forestry Institute. A very big thanks to everybody involved for their hard work in these 3 years. Otherwise, this would haven't been possible. So a little bit of background of what the situation is and why we did what we did. Well, this is something everybody knows, right? Sitka spruce is the main commercial species in Britain with 60% of the timber production. Now, as you also probably know, there has been a breeding program run by Forest Research since the 1950s and has been very successful in delivering notable genetic gains in terms of volume, growth, and yield. And that's what the result of that is that we typically called improved Sitka spruce. Of course, there is many types of improvement, but the improved Sitka spruce we are discussing here is in a way the premium one, the best improvement we can have, the full SIP. So to do this, the breeding program has established incredibly large infrastructure. So basically, we can say that we know a lot, really a lot, about the genetics of at least one provenance of Sitka spruce. Another topic of interest, of course, is climate change. So we know that drought is expected to be more common in here in Britain in the near future. So as a result of all this, we could safely say that we have 60% of the eggs in the same basket, or 60% of the timber production in the same basket. And of course, this is a little bit scary, and everybody knows that, and things have been done in order to deal with it. But what we did in particular was to formulate the following research question: can we breed for drought tolerance using the genetic pool of improved Sitka spruce? So what we know about Sitka spruce through the breeding program. And mind you, this is slightly different from what other people are doing in terms of genetics or quantitative genetics anyway. So often we see approaches where people try to select among provenances, which is, of course, a very valid approach, or, of course, selecting among the species. But here we're actually focusing on selecting among the families of one provenance, which is the formerly known QCI, nowadays Hawaii. And the reason we want to do this is because it's a very easy win if you think of it. We know so much about the genetics of this provenance that actually, with very little effort, we can actually try to find out if there is drought resilient that is heritable in here. So in order to do all this, we developed or organized the project in 4 work areas. The first one is the core for the project, right? Is the genetic control of relevant traits. A trait is something that you can measure, and that informs of something. So in this case, we want to find something that is measurable and that informs drought tolerance. So which trait informs resilience in Sitka spruce? And then we want to know whether the trait is heritable or not, because if it's not heritable, then we cannot select for this favorable trait. The fact that a trait is measurable doesn't mean that it's easy to measure, and sometimes it's not. So in order to make it possible to deploy the breeding, this kind of selection in the breeding program, then you have to make sure that you have something that that relates to that trait and you can measure easily. So that's what we try to do in the work area 2, study of resilience proxies. Yeah, so this is mostly about how do you do this operationally. The third work area was about economic quantification. The main question here was, okay, we can select for very drought-tolerant families, but how does that play out in terms of growth, for example? Is there any trade-off? That's the kind of question we wanted to answer. And then finally, there's a work area on knowledge exchange, of which this event is an example. And thank you very much, Luis, for organizing it. In this talk, we are going to focus on these two work areas: the genetic control of relevant traits and then the economic quantification. The first one is going to be delivered by Thomas, who has been the main contributor in it and also in the whole project. So, and before I hand it over to Thomas, I want to say as well that this has been the project has been possible because of the very, very large infrastructure that forest research has, and the effort and dedication of generations of scientists in the organization, as well as long-term funding to do these things. So over to you, Thomas. The ground is yours.
Thank you, Ruben. So I'll give you an overview of how we basically went about determining possible genetic control of drought tolerance in Sitka spruce and what we found. So we used timber samples from 2 sites in the UK. So one located in the north called Spade Adam in North England, and the other one was in Wales called Radnor Forest. Now we had samples stemming from almost 600 trees belonging to 29 different full sibling Sitka spruce families. And we have the genetic history, the genetic ancestry of these families. So basically the genetic parents are known. And we also have the same families present on both sides, which allows us to run comparisons and calculate correlations. Now I'd like to give you a quick description of how we got from the tree to the tree ring level analysis of growth and density. So we start by taking a cross-section from the cross-section disk, basically from each tree. We can see this here in this photograph, and from that we take a central section, cut out a central section, and this gives us basically the whole cross-section of the tree, basically from pith to bark, showing all the rings. And from this we then cut a 2 millimeter thin sample, and this we can then X-ray scan using an iTrax machine that we can see here in the right-hand corner. Now these X-ray images, as we can see an example of below here, were then analyzed using tree ring analysis software to measure both the ring width and also the ring density. The ring density we can see here in the different shadings. Basically, the darker late wood is more dense and the lighter early wood is less dense. And after cross-dating then all this data, we can confidently assign the growth year to each ring. Sorry, the animations got a bit messed up there. So the resulting ring widths are shown here. So each line represents one tree for each site, and basically showing how many millimeters each tree grew for each year. Now these curves need to be detrended, which essentially means removing the age and also the size and competition effect from these curves. And then leaving us with a clearer picture of the effect that climate had on the tree growth. Now, the approach we used for detrending was by fitting radial increment models for each site. Now, these models then allow us to calculate the predicted ring widths, shown here in red. And by dividing the measured ring width and the black curves by the predicted ring widths in red, we then are left with the more smooth detrended ring width, and they highlight the effect the climate had on ring growth. Now, these detrended ringwidths we then use to assess the tree's reaction to drought events, basically meaning how much did each tree grow then during, before, and after a drought event. And for this, we used 4 different indexes. So how we chose the drought event, I'll show you in a moment, but the drought years we were working with are 2003 to 2006 for one of our sites. All indexes are calculated using the pre and post-drought growth, as well as the growth during the drought event. So we calculated the pre and post-drought growth by taking the mean of the ring width from the 3 years before and after the event. And the growth during the drought event is just the mean of all the ring widths which fall within the drought event of interest. And the first index we used was resistance, which is an indicator of the tree's ability to resist the drought event, basically looking at how much did the growth decrease during the drought event of interest. So we compared pre and basically the during drought event growth. The second index is recovery. This indicates the tree's ability to recover from a drought event by comparing the growth after to the growth during the event. And the last 2 indexes are resilience-based indexes, basically shows the tree's capacity to withstand a drought event in terms of growth, basically how quickly does it bounce back to pre-drought level growth rates. And for this, you compare the pre and post-drought growth. And in the case of relative resilience, you also include the growth during the drought event. So to identify the drought years, we used a combination of 2 approaches. So one was carbon isotope ratios. So during a drought event, a preference of basically which carbon isotope is favored by a tree during photosynthesis shifts slightly. So an increase in this ratio can be an indicator of drought. The other approach we used was using climate data, so specifically potential evapotranspiration and precipitation. And this is used to calculate something called the standardized precipitation and evapotranspiration index. So basically, we see that here in the bottom graph, more negative values indicate more severe drought conditions. So it's basically an indicator of a water balance. So in this case, this was for the site in North England, and we found the years 2003 and 2006 based on the 2 approaches were highlighted as drought events, and we in this case focused on the 2003 event. Earlier drought events we could not use because the trees either were too young, or depending on the size of the tree, you might not have enough tree rings in the chronology to calculate the pre-drought growth. So now what we were interested in was whether we can see any evidence of genetic control of drought tolerance using the previously described indexes, or call them traits. Now, indicators of genetic control could be when we see that different families show significant differences on average to each other in their growth response to drought. Another indicator would be if the same families tend to show the same response on both sides. So our statistical analysis showed that some families did show significant differences in their resilience and resistance to the baseline. So here we can see how many families on each side showed statistically significant differences to each other. So, for example, for resilience, 11 out of 32 showed significant differences. So if we look if we maybe look at an index a bit closer, for example, recovery that showed no difference between families on average, and resilience, which showed some indication of significant differences. Here on the right, we see recovery. The averages of each family, so each box represents one family, is very close to the overall average indicated in red. So we saw no significant difference between family for the index recovery. However, for resilience, a certain amount of families did show significant differences. Something else we see straight away here is that there is a lot of variability also within each family. So each family does have quite a variable reaction in terms of growth to drought. Now, another way to see whether there's genetic control of drought tolerance would be to see whether the same family on one side will show similar growth reactions to drought on the other side. Meaning, are the more resilient families at Spade Adam also the more resilient families at Radnor? So, sorry, I don't know why my animations are going a bit wrong here. So here we found that only resilience showed a significant positive correlation between the two sides. This means that a more resilient family on one side also has a moderate tendency to be more resilient on the other. Now, this could be interpreted as a degree of genetic control of trees' resilience to drought in terms of growth as measured by this index. We do not see significant correlations for the other indexes, although they all tend to be positive, but unfortunately they were not statistically significant. So we can see that, especially for resilience, we can see that there is a slight correlation between the two sides. So we did see a lot of variability between sites, but also within families, and this does suggest that there is a strong interaction between site, or call it environment, and the genetics. With this, I'll hand back to Ruben.
Okay, thank you, Thomas. So essentially in this part, well, as Thomas already said, but as just to summarize, if we use these indexes as our trait, the traits that we're trying to identify, as to inform drought resilience, what we see, the first thing we see is that, as Thomas said, there is a lot of genetic variability in the breeding population of Sitka. So this is actually very good news, because we have been selecting quite a lot for growth, and still we have all this variability left, and that's very important. Then, as Thomas said as well, these traits are heritable to an extent, but there is also this very strong interaction between the environment and the genetics. So to answer our question, yeah, whether we can breed for drought tolerance using what we know of improved spruce, the answer is yes, we could try with this we observed. However, given this strong interaction between the genetics and the environment, we believe that we are not in a position to where we have all the evidence needed to really go for it and say, okay, pick these families and then select for them, because you could very well take these families and select for them, plant them somewhere else, and then they're not working because of this environmental effect. So our recommendation is for now to keep all the variability you can, and then as more evidence is gathered, then we can move forward with it. So the other part, the second part of the presentation, is about the economic quantification. And initially, as I said before, our idea was to focus on these more resilient families. So the idea was to simulate the profitability on the most resilient families under different climatic scenarios, different management alternatives in 4 different sites, and then compare to the other families, and then to see whether there was a trade-off between looking into resilience and then profitability, in other words, growth. However, as I said, we cannot really recommend to select for any specific families. So we changed a little bit this, and we try to do something that is still informative and useful, but with a quite a different angle. So what we would try to do is to simulate the profitability of improved Sitka spruce, at least the improved Sitka spruce that is present in those experiments, all these families, under all these scenarios. And then that in itself is quite interesting because we are focusing on climate change and what will happen in the future, but then compare also with the non-improved Sitka spruce and see what happens with non-improved Sitka spruce also in the future and whether it's relevant to keep it or not. In order to do any form of economic quantification in forestry, you typically need a growth model. You need a growth model in order to project how your trees are going to grow into the future, and think that as growth as just the same or almost the same as income. So that's why you need a growth model. So we didn't have a growth model for improved Sitka spruce, so we put together something that comes from our experiments. Please don't get excited because I know that everybody wanted to see a growth model for improved Sitka spruce. This is based on a very limited sites. So this will be developed in the near future in collaboration with our colleagues of mensuration. But for the sake of the example, this is very valid in here. So just to show you how this works. So this graph mostly shows how the simulator in a schematic way, the growth simulator. So what you need to give the simulator is first a list of trees. So in this case, we picked 4 sites. These are genetic experiments from Sitka. We provide the simulator with the diameter distribution of these 4 sites at a young age. So these are young trees that are ready to grow. Then we pick 3 climatic scenarios, and the present scenario, current climatic scenario, then a mild emission scenario, and then a severe scenario. And then we give that to the growth model. So this is the growth module, and then what it does is it picks these trees and then they grow them. They grow them for 1 year, and it calculates the volume, how much volume is in there. This is passed into the economic module, and then the economic module calculates the profitability at that point, right? We need to iterate that over time until you get to the age you want to get. So in this case, our simulation ran up to 40 years, I believe. And at the end of the simulation, what you have is your projected volume for every family, for in every site, as you can see in this graph. We also have a wood properties module. I'm not going to get into this today, but in the end, what I'm going to get into today is this final thing, is you get a projection of profitability. Icing on the cake, we repeat the whole process many times, in this case 100 realization. And this is because this is a stochastic simulation. This means that we are taking into consideration all the errors of all these models. All the models have errors by definition, and that inform about the uncertainty of a process. So it's very important that we capture this uncertainty so that we can tell managers or stakeholders in general, your profitability is this in average, but it could also be this, and it could also be this with this probability. So that's also quite interesting. So we run 100 simulations in here of realizations with over 60 million, about 60 million ring projections. I'm going to touch a little bit on this. So that's the profitability, the ideal profitability. So we used 2 different metrics to account for this. One was the net present value, NPV, and then the other one was the land expected value, LEV. I'm not going to get into any detail of how this works, but just believe me, this implies this is profitability. So in this graph, you have our 4 sites, the 4 sites that we used for simulation. On the y-axis, you have profitability, LEV and NPV. The blue line is the LEV. Let's talk about LEV only for the sake of the example. And here you have on the x-axis, you have H. You can see it. What this implies is that basically at the beginning you are in negative because you made an investment, but your trees are very small, so you cannot really sell them. At some point, your trees are big enough that if you sold them, you will compensate for your investment. And then at some point as well, you basically you get the maximum return that you could possibly have. And it's that at that point where you want more or less to place your rotation age where you will harvest, at least from an economic point of view. So we run all these simulations, all these green lines, by the way, are all this variability I was talking about, all this uncertainty around the process. But let's not get into that. Let's see how these simulations translate into results. So I will first talk about the relationship between profitability and then these resilience indexes, this trait that Thomas was talking about, just to see how this play out. So in this graph, what I try to represent for just one side is on the y-axis we have one of the indexes, the resistance, and then in the x-axis we have resilience, and then lighter colors imply more profitability. And as you can see, the families that are more profitable are also the more resilient, or tend to be. So vigorous families are more resilient. So that's first thing I wanted to mention. And now I'm going to summarize all the rest in this graph. So this is the effect of spacing. That's the kind of management alternative we used, genetics, and climate on profitability. Okay, so let's see if I succeed with this. So here in the y-axis, you have profitability in terms of LEV, the land expected value, in pounds per hectare. On the left-hand side of the graph, you have simulations for 2-meter spacing. On the right-hand side, you have simulation for 2.5-meter spacing. Then each block of 2 boxes is a climatic scenario, present scenario, mild scenario, severe scenario of climate change. And the red boxes are improved Sitka spruce. The blue boxes are non-improved Sitka spruce. Fine. So the first thing we see here very, very clearly is that with 2.5-meter spacing, you get much more profitability for all the scenarios, in any case. Now, don't jump into conclusions here. This is most likely an artifact of the simulator, because we cannot consider mortality as yet. Therefore, it may well be that this 2-meter spacing is actually not realistic. Nobody's expecting at the end of a rotation to have 3,300 stems per hectare, because there will be some mortality and perhaps some thinning. So this is just probably an artifact of the model. However, this is very clear. The more severe the scenario, the less profitable your forest is. And I don't think this is only for Sitka spruce, this is for everything, and this is very clear, and it confirms something that we already know. But if there's anybody who is skeptic, I think this is just yet another piece of evidence. And the other thing we see is that improved Sitka spruce works better than non-improved Sitka spruce in general, which, as you will expect, that's good news. However, not always. There's one scenario here for the 2.5-meter spacing, the more severe scenario, where this is reversed. And this is reversed for the 4 sites. So that's actually a quite important point. I will skip this one when I get to the conclusions of all this part. So as we have seen, there is a general loss of profitability due to climate change, quite an important thought to keep in mind. But second, it seems that the original selection for vigorous trees in the breeding program led to also more resilient trees. So this is another success of the breeding program, I want to say. Now this is based on the hypothesis that the more resilient must be more profitable. However, this is just one trait we have tried. It's the trait of this growth response. It may well be that the trees that are not very conservative in growth, that really go for it, they may get into cavitation, and then mortality may kick in. So that's something that needs to be studied a bit further, because we come to this conclusion that we really have it, that our trees are really great. But still, that's quite promising results and very positive results. And then the last bit that is to be highlighted is that non-improved Sitka spruce is not to be disregarded as yet, because we have seen that very unanimously for all sites, it seems that under very tough conditions, it may be that Haida-Y QCI is actually going to do as well as improved Sitka spruce. So it's worth to keep this genetic variability just in case. The general conclusion of the whole project really is, to me, beyond the scientific fact, is that Sitka spruce is and should actually be used as a model to study resilience, at least for commercial conifers, because we know a lot about the genetics of it. So we can implement a number of things in here and then transfer the knowledge to other emerging species. And just one more minute before I go. This is like the deleted scenes in films. So things that didn't go well in the project, however, led to good stuff, to other byproducts that the community will be able to use very soon. So we had an interest to study in studying stem cracking as a proxy for economic resilience. Also because there is some evidence that there is a genetic control of this. And also we all of a sudden had quite a few micro drills. That's a device called resistograph, or people call it resistograph, and you can get a density profile of your tree very quickly. It's a bit coarse, but something really that allow you to sample quite a lot. So we didn't come to any conclusion with stem cracking. We don't know why stem cracking happens. But what we did while we were trying to do that was the first rigorous genetic oriented stem crack survey in Great Britain. We also called it the first open source software to process the microdrill signal. That was our colleague Pierrot Froment. And then we conducted also the first calibration of the microdrill signal for British Sitka spruce, so that this signal is transformed into density. That was Thomas who did it. And beyond that, I want to come back to this simulator, to this first stochastic growth simulator in Great Britain. This is the first time we do this, and any model can be included in this infrastructure. And as a result of it, you see now we are also doing other things such as predicting strength grade in timber. So that's all on our side. Thank you very much for your attention.